Hello, and welcome to my channel. My name is Jonathan Cohn, and today I'll be providing my book review of the book Raise the Dawn by David R. George. This is one of the novels in the Typhon Pact series. I have reviewed every novel in the Typhon Pact series thus far. As a quick rundown, I read Zero Sum Game. It was okay. I read Seize the Fire. Didn't particularly like it. Rough Beasts of Empire, actually pretty good, and written by the same author as Raise the Dawn, but it had some significant problems. Then I had Paths of Disharmony, the best book in the series, flawlessly executed. Then I had Plagues of Night, which was meh. It was okay, didn't love it. So now I have Raise the Dawn, and a lot of people say that these two books are a duology. And I totally see where they're coming from, but because of the plot threads that are discussed, I would actually argue that it's better to view these three books, all by the same author, Rough Beasts of Empire, Plagues of Night, and Raise the Dawn, as a trilogy, a non-linear trilogy. Because, well, I guess it's a linear trilogy, because they all... Anyway, I think that there's stuff that's set up in this book, and continued in this book, and it's all properly paid off in this book. So... overall, this is an entertaining book. I think that David R. George did a great job wrapping up the plot threads he needed to do. I think he also did a great job of exploring the characters that needed to be explored and the plot lines that needed to be explored and the world building that needed to be explored. There's just a few elements in here that drag it down from the top spot in the upper echelons of Star Trek books. So let's first talk about what works for it in the plot. The best thing about this book is the Sisko storyline, because he sets up things with Sisko in these two books that are absolutely infuriating, and I don't know whether the plan was to do this story all along, or whether he set things up and then the backlash was so big when it came out that he changed it for this final book. I don't know what happened as a result. I'm given to think a little mixture of both. Maybe he planned to eventually do the things in this book, but he did it faster because people were so angry about Rough Beasts of Empire. But he resolves a lot of Sisko's storyline in this book, and it was very satisfying to see that resolution happen. Likewise, we get fan-favorite characters who've been off-screen come back on-screen after several books. We also had some great character interactions. There's some scenes between Ro, Laren, and Miles O'Brien and Nog, which are hilarious. And then there's also some great scene. There's a great scene, and I think a few other sequences that have Bashir and Serena Douglas. And then there's a third person in one of the scenes that just stole the show, and that's Quark. I do think that David R. George is the best Quark writer. He even wrote a novel with the guy who played Quark. But I think that he understands Quark better than anyone and actually does a good job and makes Quark an entertaining character. So I hope that he has more books of Quarks than I can read. But this book also has a great political dialogue sequences. So this series promised us the Cold War, big epic moments of political strife and military strife between the Typhon Pact and the Federation. And book one, it has it, but it's more of like an espionage book. It's more like a Jack Ryan book than it is like a big old Typhon Pact Cold War book. Then you have, which I guess the Jack Ryan books are, but then you had Seize the Fire, which had no Typhon Pact in it, almost none. Then you had Rough Beasts of Empire, which did a good job with it, but it had the terrible Sisko storyline here. Then you had Paths of Disharmony, which did a great job with political sequences, but it didn't have the Typhon Pact as a big player on it. It was more about the Federation losing one of its member states. And then you had Plagues of Night, where he was teeing up a big Typhon Pact showdown. And this is the payoff of that big Typhon Pact showdown. And this book, the beginning of it is the whole action sequence that results from the end of the last book. If you know how the last book ended, you know how this book starts. But it only lasts for 50 pages. And then we're moving on and we're like doing aftermath stuff. And it's like he should have had more time to do the big results of the climax of the last book, because the climax of the last book is a huge deal. And they just didn't, I don't think they properly spent enough time with that. And if they'd cut out some of the superfluous moments in this book, they could have made room for telling the big political storyline that they needed to do, and they wouldn't have had to make the book too much longer. But there are some sequences that have the Federation's leadership with Nan Bacco, who is a great character, and also with the Typhon Pact leadership with Gail Kemimore. The two of them have some great scenes with their leaderships and their advisors and whatnot, and there is a sequence that is a prolonged sequence that when it started, I said, oh, yes, that's cool. Like, that's a cool, like, when I feel that viscerally, yes, that's good. I'm excited. And so this book did some of that stuff right. So I've talked about what overall made the book pretty good. There was a few little flaws in there, but overall what made the book good. I do have some critiques that really drag down the book. One critique is, it's really combined, and that is whenever David R. George tries to deal with supernatural elements, and whenever he tries to deal with less clear elements. Whenever he's trying to tell something that's more nebulous, I don't think he does a good job of this. There is a sequence of the supernatural in this book that just doesn't work for me, and I feel like it takes the wind out of the plot of the book, and it's like some Star Trek authors feel that they have to go into the hard sci-fi in order to write a Star Trek novel. And I don't think you have to do that. Sometimes it works, but if you're writing a political series, the Typhon Pact, you don't need the supernatural stuff. Just write the political stuff. Let someone else deal with the supernatural. And yet, David R. George feels like it's not true Star Trek unless it has that kind of supernatural element. It's the same reason that Revelation and Dust, the first book in the Fall series, is my least favorite book in the Fall series, because he does the exact same thing with the exact same character, trying to tell this more supernatural element to it. And I'm like, you don't need that to tell a good story, specifically a good Star Trek story. And there's also, I want to give it away without spoiling. It's just like a vision sequence in the book that when it comes in, it just pops in out of nowhere. It doesn't explain itself throughout major portions of the book. And I figured out what it was pretty fast, but I didn't like the way it unfolded. I didn't like that you could have just done that sequence at the end. Just squish it all into the last few pages of the book. You don't have to do it the 3 or 4 times that it happens previously, because it takes up like 7, 8, 9 pages each time it shows up. So it takes up like 30 or 40 pages of the book, and you didn't need it. And you could have replaced that with and put it towards the opening of the book in the prologue section, which deals with the big climax of the previous book, and that would have made it a much more entertaining book. Like, this book should have been more like the first High Republic novel for Star Wars, dealing with the great disaster. Instead, it's like, we got the disaster, but we gotta move on and do other things. So that's what made this book immensely frustrating. But I still overall give it a good, positive review. It's still entertaining. I give it a 7.3 out of 10. So to give you some indication, I think that Paths of Disharmony is still the best in the series, and it's not going to be dethroned. And I think Rough Beasts of Empire is probably a second closest, even though it does terrible things with Sisko. This book is close behind in that it fixes a lot of Sisko's story and tells an entertaining story, but it doesn't hit as hard. The political stuff doesn't hit as hard as it should, because he has to make way for the supernatural in this book. Then I think you have the two mediocre, they're okay or good, and then you have the bad book. So that is my review of the novel Raise the Dawn. And I think the ending of this book is actually quite entertaining. So I really enjoy this novel, and I'm almost done with the series. I've got a lot of Star Trek books still on my shelves to read, so I'm so excited to get into them next year. So if you've read this book, what did you think of it? And if you have Star Trek books that you want me to read, let me know those comments in the comments section down below. But until next time, I'm Jonathan, and thank you for watching.